Hey everyone, I got some more modern action for you guys today. So I'm going to be playing in a 4-round daily event with green-black. And I've played with this deck a little bit since my last article, but not too much. The changes that I've made are very minuscule. Basically, I just added some Lifebane zombies instead of the Corsair Crew fixes that were in the deck before. And after playing with that for a little bit, the Lifebanes have been good, but I still think it's probably wrong. I noticed in a few spots against other creature decks where I didn't have the luxury of like playing a controlling game. Like I didn't have as much life gain or as much like toughness as I wanted. So these Lifebanes were like pretty good at racing, but they're not very good at allowing me to, you know, to hold the fort or whatever. So I got beaten down by like some Leonin Arbiters and some Thalias and whatnot. But the Lifebanes basically just came in as an answer to Restoration Angel and Birthing Pod decks, and I think they do their job there pretty well, but I'm not sure if they're worth the slots, especially main deck. So if they're not a good main deck card, they're also a pretty weak sideboard card, but I still want to keep trying them, so I'm going to keep them for today. And then I have a 1-1 split on Putrefy Maelstrom Pulse, and I saw a guy that either 3-1 or 4-0 to daily that had 4 Putrefies, basically, instead of like the slaughter packs. And that was kind of interesting because it gave him a ton of answers to Birthing Pod, which might actually be pretty attractive. But so far I've liked slaughter packs as an instant speed, basically 0 mana spell against Twin. It allows you to tap out and progress your board and stuff like that. And same thing against the control decks with Colonnades and Restoration Angels and stuff. So it's also like Pact is also, you know, basically not remandable, which is pretty nice. So I've liked these so far, and I think you need Dismembers to have like some cheaper removal, but I don't know, like that guy's list was definitely interesting. I have the Pulse to handle Planeswalkers, so like if a Karn doesn't get Thoughtseized or something and they manage to play that, like maybe I can Pulse it, but it's also pretty hard to say that like once they play Karn and then probably like kill your best thing and then you spend your turn pulsing it, like that you're actually going to have a shot that game, because presumably they still have access to Tron. So maybe the pulse just isn't even worth it and you can't really go that route with Karn. So I don't know. Liliana has not been too big of a deal just because you have 8 discard spells. You know when it's coming, you can maybe play around it. Treetop Village is very good against it, so Liliana has not been a big deal. So you know, maybe we should move in a more Putrefy direction. The only thing other than that is that the White Splash has become a little bit more popular, so there's some Lingering Souls and sideboard cards like Stony Silence, and I think that's okay. Lingering Souls is not that impressive to me. I think it is good against Affinity, but I don't think it's enough to save you against Affinity, like just on its own. So one odd thing is that the White Splash decks don't have Path to Exile, which I understand, but I also kind of disagree with, where the argument against is that you need more white sources and the deck basically just ends up playing like 12, and that's not really enough, which I agree with, but I think you can fix that. And the other argument against Path is that this deck is trying to constrict people's resources, and Path giving them a land kind of goes against that and just makes it so it's harder to actually play that game, but I kind of disagree with that. So consider something like Tron, where you're worried about their non-basic lands. You know, if you like Path their Wormcoil or something and give them a force, it's not really going to be that big of a deal as long as you're able to Tech Edge and Fulminator and keep them off of actually having Tron. Against something like Pod, you're more so worried about like their Kitchen Finks and their Red Caps, their Voices, and not too worried about like their mana base, really. So if it gets to a point where Pod has 6 lands but like no hand and no board, that's fine. I'm not too worried about them top decking like a really powerful spell, because they don't have that many in their deck. They're very much about just getting like a critical mass of resources and like grinding people out and stuff, and like Path kind of shuts down that avenue. And that's basically my plan against that deck, is either like I would want Path, you know, if I was playing white. So either like Path, Scavenging Ooze, Lifebane Zombie, Skin Render, Grafdigger's Cage, just to like shut down their persist guys and have ways to deal with voices and stuff like that. So I think that's the way that you want to approach that matchup. And then Against something like Twin, like you might use Tectonic Edge, but generally you're more worried about their creatures, and that's the point I'm trying to make, is that, you know, yeah, you are trying to constrict their resources kind of as a whole, but in most matchups you're trying to constrict like a certain resource and not all of them, you know. So like I said, against Pot, if they have 6 lands but you've killed all their guys successfully, that is a win. Against Twin, it's kind of the same thing. So there are very few decks where you're actually like trying to interact with them, kill their creatures, and like pressure their mana base with Tectonic Edge. So I don't think Path is that bad. Other than that, the sideboard is basically what I've been playing, and my sideboard has like more 2s and 3s than most people, and it's basically just because there are things that I have lost to that I think are very difficult. So something like Birthing Pod, where I have a bunch of cages, I have a bunch of skin renders, I think that matchup is very, very tough, and I think most people would agree with me, but for whatever reason, like, people are kind of like skipping out sideboard slots against that. So there are some awkward situations where, like, I played against Ad Nauseam the other day, and I didn't have a ton to side in, which was kind of disappointing, because that's generally how these black-green and X, you know, whatever your splash is, decks operate, where they have a bunch of different sideboard cards that just, like, cover their bases against a bunch of different things. So you'll see stuff like Rakdos Charm, Aven Mind Sensor, like those types of cards, which are good in a wide variety of matchups, whereas my sideboard is more narrow. So that's kind of like the weak point of the deck as I have it right now. And I'm also not 100% sold on my both my Pod sideboard plan and my Affinity sideboard plan, so hopefully I'll get to play against some of those decks. But other than that, I like this deck a lot. There's not too much else to say about it. Just like the removal suite, whether or not you splash or don't splash, like whether or not you play a 4 Scavenging Ooze. I think drawing multiples is pretty bad, so I only have 3. How many discard spells you play, I like the full 8. And I think most people are at 4 Abrupt Decays now, even though they're kind of weak in some matchups. And I have 25 lands because you have 8 lands that are utility lands, and like, your mana base is pretty good. There are a lot of dual lands, but they're also kind of awkward and don't necessarily work with each other. So, like, I have a Woodland Cemetery right now that is not great with, like, Treetop Village Twilight Mire, for example. So the mana base is reasonable, but it is not super good. So you do want a bunch of lands to ensure that you have, you know, double black, and then, like, green, maybe double green to either play 2 green spells or play Ooze and activate it, stuff like that. So the mana base is kind of in question, and the sideboard is in question, the life banes, and then, like, how many putrefies I play. But I like everything else that's going on in the deck. So with that aside, like I said, hopefully we play against some Pod and some Affinity. Those are the matchups I really want to test, and that's it. Let's go.